Hey everybody, I'm Scott Butwell and welcome to my YouTube channel. And today I'm going to talk about fiction writing, specifically flash fiction. If you haven't heard of flash fiction is just a lot shorter, concise fiction. Usually it's around maybe 200 words to 500 words. Sometimes it might go up to about 1,000 words. So it's just, a really mashed down, shorter version of fiction. And I know for myself, I always wanted to write fiction. When I was in college, I really liked Jack Kerouac's On the Road. I was a big fan of Raymond Carver and his short stories. I liked Ernest Hemingway. But the thing is, whenever I tried to write fiction, it just was horrible. So I just had this kind of fixed mindset for years that I was no good at fiction. And I came across memoir writing about 10 years ago, and I used a lot of fiction techniques. And I found I was good at memoir writing. I was writing a lot of adventures with my son and my relationship with my son who's on the autism spectrum. And then recently I got tagged into a fiction series on medium.com for the publication QuickTalk. And I realized I wasn't as bad at fiction writing as I thought. It kind of came naturally to me. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some techniques on how to write flash fiction. So you can maybe overcome the same fixed mindset that I had towards your fiction writing abilities. I want to share a quick example of my most recent flash fiction example, and it's part of a series called Diary 1984 in the publication QuickTalk for Medium.com. And it's really interesting because it's a group of Medium writers, and the Medium writers are actually characters in their high school form in the fictional series. And so here's an example of flash fiction, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to share 7 tips in very concise form of how you can write some flash fiction. Hope you enjoy this excerpt. Dear Diary, in case you haven't been informed, I've been exiled to the land of tea and football because my dad is a frickin' Charles Dickens scholar. You know, Dickens, the author of Great Expectations with a dumb orphan named Pip. My dad is doing research on Dickens for a sabbatical as a professor, and here we are in London. My dad found out the other day we'd be reading Great Expectations in what the English call year 10 or sophomore year, and so he was telling me all about how it's a Bill Dung's Roman novel during breakfast before school yesterday, like I cared. But I laughed at the Bill Dung's Roman part. I think it was my first laugh in the UK. Everything is so different here, and I don't even know what's going on half the time. I'm depressed. There's this kid everyone calls Angry Kid, and he was taking me around and introducing me to all of his friends, and he was getting me to say all these British slang words. I didn't even know what I was saying, but it reminded me what my brother and I did back in the States with that Romanian chick, Adelina Vasile, and how English beat Sally Prague would always get so pissed off at both of us. Well, now I know how poor Adelina felt. I feel like the butt of so many jokes. So that's a little example there. I'm not saying it's the world's greatest example of fiction or flash fiction. I just wanted to avoid any copyright issues by reading someone else's work here. So I'm going to get right to 7 tips here. And they're going to be really, really concise because we're talking about flash fiction here. That's, again, writing that's really somewhere between 200 and 500 words, or maybe up to 1,000 words. Tip number 1, mash your story down. So one thing I've noticed the most from watching some other YouTube videos on flash fiction is basically it tries to take all the elements of a short story and fiction and just tries to really mash them down into like a really more tighter, concise form. So it's got characters, it's got plot, it's got like the inciting incident to kind of kick off a scene. Then it has the rising action building up to a climax. But it's just trying to mash and really condense those into like a shorter form. So it's like if you were playing a basketball game instead of 4 quarters, maybe flash fiction is 1 quarter, but it's trying to take all those elements of a game and just putting them in a much more tighter form. Number 2, know your story's fire. So I got this tip from Kiernan Westwood's YouTube channel, and he's a big flash fiction writer, and one thing he says is to really know what the fire is in your story. And I think what he's saying there is know what's the part of your story that's the most important to what your story is all about. You know, what's the part that really has the heat and the fire to bring your story to life. So in my story, the excerpt that I read is being exiled to another country, the UK, and being lost, being confused. So that's the part I really want to emphasize. Another flash fiction example I did was bringing a whoopee cushion to high school. So it was basically emphasizing the immaturity of the character, me as the narrator. So know your fire, just know where the heat is in your story, and just focus on that, because again, flash fiction is short.
Tip number 3, foreshadow the story's fire.
You guys who write on medium.com know how important the beginning of a story is, because if it doesn't hold people's attention, they are going to bail. So the same thing's true here with flash fiction. And I'm going to quote Kiernan Westwood again. He says, start with your fire. Kind of foreshadow that element that's going to be the fire in the middle of your story. So start with that same element. So for my example that I used with being exiled to the UK, I'm confused in this other country. So I should start with some confusion and kind of lead that confusion up to the fire in the middle part where I'm going to deal with that confusion.
Tip number 4, say yes to your plot.
I know a lot of you guys are thinking, I can't write fiction. I'm just terrible at it. And I feel you. That's what I've felt, for, most of my life. And so one little breakthrough I've had in just writing a couple stories here for QuickTalk is that the principle from improv of say yes can really help you with fiction writing, or really any kind of writing. And in improv, say yes means, one character says a line of dialogue and another character has to say yes. And say yes means you're agreeing to it and adding to it. You're affirming. Even if they say there's an alien knocking on the door, you have to kind of agree and believe that that alien is knocking on the door and add to it. So the way it works with fiction is just, if you start your beginning of your story and you got your characters in the beginning of your plot, just believe that if you say yes to your plot and to your characters, your story is just going to kind of move forward, So you're saying yes to whatever kind of comes into your mind. And then I believe it's yes and. You're just adding to it with that and, just kind of building a chain of, one sentence to the next sentence, and your story is kind of building, kind of sentence by sentence. So say yes to it. Just believe whatever you're adding just is fine. Just have that belief.
Tip number 5, build your story to the middle.
Build to the middle just means that you have the plot element of rising action. You have a series of events, but again, it's going to be very, very compact and condensed. But you have a series of events that kind of build on your beginning, or that inciting incident. If you know what that means you have some kind of event that turns the character's world upside down. And again, the rising action is going to build fast. This is flash fiction all the way up to that climax. And again, the climax is where you're bringing that heat. Bring that heat of knowing what your story is all about. And then again, you can kind of end it with some resolution of what your character learns.
Number 6, emphasize the fire in the middle of your story.
Hopefully you really picked up here that the main thing about flash fiction, and again, I'm giving credit here to Kiernan Westwood, flash fiction is about bringing that fire, knowing that element of what your story is all about, and really threading that through beginning, middle, to end of your story. So emphasize the fire, that thing that brings that heat to the story. If you don't really have that heat, then I wonder if your flash fiction is going to be really any good. So you got to know that heat to your story.
Tip number 7, focus on small moments.
Remember, the main thing about flash fiction is it mashes everything down, all the elements of a traditional short story, into a much concise form. And even if the story is like 300 words, I think what really makes a story stand out is you just focus on the small moments. So maybe you just have this one moment, that's really stands out. That's what people are going to remember. That's maybe what your story is going to be about. And so I think that's good for any story, really, is if you can focus on the small moments that people are going to take away with. And really the moments could be what contains, what your story is all about. So focus on the small moments. So there you have it. There's a little mini lesson on flash fiction, and the one part I really emphasize is it's a lot of fun, you know. And if you have a fixed mindset like I did that you can't write fiction, I think if you try that say yes principle, just say yes, just affirm that you can do it. Start your story, just affirm that little part of the story, and just kind of build that story like a chain from one sentence to the next by saying yes over everything that you create in your fictional world. So you can do it, and let me give you guys 3 different publications for Medium.com writers. If you don't know about Medium.com, you can be paid for your stories that you write that are read by other Medium members. But for Medium writers, let me drop QuickTalk. I mentioned that's where I've been doing my writing through the Diary 1984 series. And then there's also by K.L. Simmons, Pure Fiction. She has a publication, great publication. And there's also one I've written for called Microcosm. And they're really focused on flash fiction. So if you want to kind of really test out your flash fiction, Microcosm is good. And let me end by saying, if you have found this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you clicked subscribe so you can receive more helpful tips. I try to make these actionable tips that will help you on Medium.com to really work on the craft of writing. That's what I really like to write about. I haven't done any videos on making money on Medium.com. But I feel like if you really improve your stories and you write really good stories and you learn about the craft of writing, people will read your stories. Remember, you're paid on Medium by the number of people that read stories. So if you get your stories in better shape and quality, then the money will follow. So have a great day, everybody, and happy writing.